A warming world is releasing ancient viruses into our environment. What might this do to the human race? Check it out, leave your comments, ding the bell, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. Wanted to talk about, kind of part two of the Wuhan virus here. Wuhan, China. Most Americans have no idea what or even where Wuhan, China is. They're figuring out that it's a city, but what kind of city and what it's all about. Wuhan is the Detroit of China. If you think of Detroit, not in today's process, post NAFTA and post WTO and all that stuff, but think of Detroit before the Clinton presidency, before 1992. Detroit was the epicenter of manufacturing in the United States. And echoing out from Detroit, there were millions of people in Detroit who worked in manufacturing. They built mostly cars, but they built lots of stuff in Detroit. They built refrigerators in Detroit. They built air conditioning units in Detroit. They built TV sets in Detroit. They built all kinds of stuff. Jerry Schneiderman and I used to own a company, Langley St. Clair Instrumentation Systems, back in the 80s. We sold picture tubes for TRS-80 Model 3s and other, this was early computer days, right? This was in the 80s. And our picture tubes, about half of them were manufactured in Detroit. Detroit made things. Now, granted, most of those jobs have now gone to China. And where have they gone in China? Wuhan. Wuhan is the industrial epicenter of China. And just like, Detroit made things, and therefore, draw a 500-mile circle around Detroit, and you would have all these cities in Michigan, in Ohio, in Indiana, where there were secondary manufacturing facilities where they were making, like car radios and steering wheel assemblies and airbags, and, car radios are now made in China. The steering wheel assemblies are now made in China, or in Mexico, rather. The airbags are now made in Japan, actually. But we used to make all that stuff in the cities around Detroit. And that's how, so if you think of Detroit in 1991, that's how Wuhan, China is right now. Okay, got that clear in your brain? Now the question, what if Wuhan shut down? What if it just shut down? What if Detroit shut down in 1991? What would that do to the U.S. economy? I'm telling you, get ready. There's some big stuff coming. But that's the smallest of the concerns. The larger concern is that, this virus gets out and it gets around the world, or another virus gets out. For example, the flu. One of the things that we're learning is that climate change is making for shorter winters, which you would think, since the flu season in the Northern Hemisphere is during the winter, you would think that would mean a shorter flu season. No, it actually turns out in tropical climates, you've got flu year-round. And apparently there's this tipping point where when your summers become a certain length, you end up with flu year-round. And if you have flu year-round, according to Robert Schooley, an infectious disease specialist who is the editor of the journal Clinical Infectious Diseases, he says, it would not be surprising to see a year-round influenza zone expand as the world warms. A warm climate promotes sustained transmission of the flu as opposed to seasonal outbreaks, so we might get flu year-round. Now, what does that mean? Well, currently, this from an article from Nexus Media by Marlene Simmons. Currently in the United States, the virus evolves for several months during the winter and stops evolving in the spring. If the mutations of the flu virus, if the virus continues changing year-round, we could begin to see more dangerous forms of influenza. Isn't that wonderful? Then they just sawed into some 15,000-year-old glacier ice that they got from the Chinese region of Tibet, these scientists. And what do they find? 33 groups of virus genuses. Now, keep in mind, the species is the smallest subset. So these are whole families, essentially, not using literally that word in the scientific meaning, but whole groups of viruses, 28 of which were previously unknown to science. The researchers warn that in a worst-case scenario, one or more of these viruses, as one Twitter user said, we've opened up a Pandora's box with climate change. One or more of these viruses might be a human pathogen, or a mammalian pathogen that could mutate to be a human pathogen, like this coronavirus did in China. I mean, the permafrost, last year in Siberia, or in 2016, excuse me, in Siberia, because the permafrost is melting all over the world, Siberia is mostly permafrost, this 75-year-old dead reindeer bubbled up to the surface, and it could have easily have been a 7,500-year-old, because most of the permafrost is 10,000 years old, that had died of anthrax. Now, this part of the world hadn't seen anthrax since 1941. There hadn't been an anthrax outbreak. But 72 nomadic herders, 41 children were hospitalized. A 12-year-old died because this reindeer floated up to the surface, this dead reindeer. And down the road in Siberia, last year, they discovered in thawed-out permafrost, a 30,000-year-old giant virus, in other words, a more sophisticated, more modern kind of virus, 30,000 years old, that was still able to infect bacteria or single-celled organisms, amoebas, excuse me. 30,000-year-old virus, still contagious. 22.5% of the northern hemisphere is permafrost. 50% of Canada's landmass. And it is melting right now. Dr. Richard Dixon points out that in some of the melting in Northern Europe, it has unearthed bodies, human bodies, that died from the Spanish flu in 1918. There in another place, and I'm sorry I don't have the exact city, it's just a reference to it, fragments of smallpox have been found. So ancient diseases or older diseases coming back to haunt us as a consequence of climate change. And in the face of this, the United States is the only country in the world without a national healthcare system to deal with these potential threats. How insane is that, scientifically speaking, or even just thoughtfully speaking?